Uh, what's up? Uh, Also, wait, I'm not saying that microphone. Is this working? Yeah, it's working. Okay, it seems we don't have any lag, so we are back. Good evening. Today, I didn't even change. I got the thing above my head that says today. I should have changed that. I think they're like two streams, so I should have changed that. I haven't. Anyway, we're not here to look at that, so it doesn't really matter in this one case. So, also, sort of, no, our question, if we're not here to look at that, what are we here today? What are we looking at? What are we gonna be looking at? Good question. Uh, my God. let me let me say it before it's too late. One day, taking into consideration how I am having almost always some sort of throat issue. One day I might lose my voice. I guess I don't know. Too hard to think about. Too complicated, and also most surely very negative. I guess so. Yeah, it can happen, but it doesn't really have any weight or anything like that. Anyway, besides that, today, today, after it feels like a long time, supposedly it was just 2 days of break. It was it even 2 days? I don't know. I think it was just one, no? But anyways, here we are, coming back after a little bit. Basically, that's what matters. That we are back, and what is the plan for today? What are we trying to talk about, or what are we trying to observe? Anyway, I I have been wasting some time considering this. I I think there are issues that we can solve by thinking about them. I think there are others that we find pleasure in thinking about. I guess one day it might become a possibility to disclose our opinion on things. There is something wonderful about being social creatures, and that is we get to discuss what are the inner experiences and the inner arguments that we can create out the world with other individuals. The grand scheme of life. Something funny that happens is getting to share stuff, getting to talk about all of those things with those that surround us in any manner. So we utilize a lot of our time in trying to formulate interesting stuff just to keep ourselves busy with things to talk about. A way in which you can see it is we have designed the entertainment of the mind through the mind itself by a way of allowing the mind once again to take central stage in terms of importance, because what we can picture and what we can say becomes the most complex thing to talk about always. It's not the world itself that is so much of a, I will say, of an interesting thing. It's just what we get to have inside of ourselves, inside of the mind. And it's not really something bad, but it's just something interesting to think about, because you end up realizing something funny. In many cases, what happens is we are not truly ourselves interested in thinking out the stuff that we are thinking. What we are doing is believing that we might have the possibility of discussing whatever it is that we were thinking about with other people. We are looking forward to getting to see the reactions to some degree. I think the easiest way to it is we don't like to just entertain ourselves in terms of, for example, we do not make shows for our own amusement. We have created comedy as an experience that everybody can go through. And what comes after that is subtly that we can make it look like it is the most important thing. And on a different level, it doesn't mean that it isn't necessary. What I can say is, I find it funny how we have departed so much from of the previous conceptions that we had about how the world shall function. So, in certain ways, we end up with things like comedy being such necessary resources for our own health and whatnot. And it's always interesting to see that the, the issue is not itself that we need this stuff that we have created, but the systems that make it happen in that way. We can distract ourselves with other entertainment, with this sort of discussion of things, the enjoyment of just the ideas and nothing else instead of the realities, because what we have around is almost inaccessible. We are not truly involved in the world. We do not have the possibility of being a human being of importance in many ways. So, the most useful remedy for such a wound to the self is just an entertainment of any kind, something that allows us to forget. Yes, but anyway, I love what I have said so far. It's not what I was here for. I I was I was originally thinking about something completely different. I had been trying to understand this uh, concept. Something funny that I heard was this idea of how there are. I think it's directly said by Freud. I guess I had been studying a lot, and most of what I have been studying has been related to Freud. So, probably, if we need to encapsulate what my sources are for this stream, you can turn to that guy to see, wow, what the fuck am I referencing? I, I have been thinking about it also. It's like a whole different idea, so let me continue with this. After that, I will mention the other thing if I can remember about it. But anyways, it was what happens. What's very funny is ideas themselves can get to be very complicated. We allow ourselves to think a lot about the stuff so that we can create even more interconnected ideas about things. The issue is we can forget that it is also necessary for us to share what we are trying to talk about, because if we do not involve ourselves with any kind of environment, we have the possibility to letting it go and not seeing the necessity of being in terror. It's retreating from the world allows us to keep on retreating from the world itself, a sort of self-feeding loop of sorts. which just taking this detour in the ways in which we used to act, make it possible for us to keep on committing not a mistake, I wouldn't say the same mistakes, but rather committing the same type of actions and getting the same sort of consequences that come because of those things. So I wouldn't say that it's something directly bad, but in general, this related to thinking. It has a very particular thing that I have started to find out more about is we allow ourselves to keep on making more and more complex explanations about things, no matter how little we can actually say or express the importance of this thing in the world. We can keep creating complex and far more. I was wanna say sinistrous. I don't think it's directly bad, but rather useless, I guess, would be a better word. Forms of ideas that we later on get to share with others if it is that we desire to do so. And in many of those cases, what happens is we, if we have spent enough time thinking about something, there is a wonderful effect that gets applied. Only I can understand the things that I do create through my own hands to the best of my capacity, as long as I am consciously creating it. Let's say there is a wonderful distinction here between conscious and unconscious. Yeah, I am only talking about the conscious things, I guess. The unconscious manifestations of identity or whatever, that's not here. So all of the things that I can create consciously gets to be as much of a useful thing as they are only for me. Everyone else who has to deal with what I create also has to deal with the necessity of interpreting what I create into their own way of observing the world. This idea of how every single one of us is an individual being who enters into relationship with the surrounding universe of things and starts to understand itself in relation to everything else and in regards to how we are only because we are not anything else than us. That's the basic explanation of how we can come to be. And due to that very same effect, it also happens that when we take something that someone else created, we need to first and foremost be capable of fitting it into anything that we already understood. We cannot really be capable of recreating the same process of creation that they had. We can only, through mental processes, try to abstract the ideas that they mention into our ways of thinking. So what happens is that we can more and more throughout time properly assimilate what is the main thing that they seem to try and yeah and they make. So we can only create this stuff through that process of imitation. That's so much of a, I guess, basic thing. The issue ends up being also a funny reality is because when we, okay, when I am creating something, I get to have a much better experience dealing with that same thing by myself than if I had to explain it to someone else so that they could understand what we are now going to be doing, the both of us. And what happens is when more and more singularities enter into what was a concept born out of just one human being. We are all subjected to the difficulties of properly getting to do anything that is in any way related to what we ourselves are interested in making appear in the world. Let's say what what's true, the symbolic explanations that we are capable of mixing with one another and combining in order to bring it into life a new idea. That process is a lot more complicated through the eyes of someone else. Not because it's impossible for them to understand us, but rather because their own symbolic realm stands in a completely different, not in a completely different ground. The basis that every one of us creates to see the world are as such so disparate that when we start to enforce more and more similar ideas between one another, it slowly becomes more apparent that we are not truly capable of closing in every single bridge, let's say, or closing in every single gap with proper bridges. Sorry. And I wouldn't say it's impossible to reach comprehension, but at this point I am taking a long detour just to say, yeah, sadly, if someone else wants to replicate what we created, what's through our mental apparatus we were capable of fictioning and expressing into words or any kind of speech of enunciation and any kind of claim sorts. What we have in our hands then is sadly not something directly negative, but rather a realization. We, as singular beings, move a lot more faster than when we are working together. And I wouldn't say it's directly something bad, but I would rather and would trust sort of say we are indeed having issues due to how it works in ways in which it requires us to need more discussion between all the parties of any group in order to be capable of establishing similarities. And until here, possible critique that you can make is what's the point of this? What's the real point of what I'm talking about? All of this is related to symbolics, the, the ways in which we can interpret the world and whatnot. I'm not trying to say that it is bad that we try to create a cohesive narrative between all of us, that we try to share things so that we can all stand on the same logical grounds. Is that what I'm trying to say? Not exactly. I'm more so aiming towards this realm of what happens is just that we believe we can work properly in creating something that everyone can inhabit without realizing that we are just annoying ourselves in the process of ignoring who we are. We, I think to some degree, you can say aptitudes. We have all different aptitudes, so that we can deal with some manifestations better ones than others. And such is the case that in every single field, you can find somebody who is so much better at something than anyone else, because we all have proficiencies and capacities. The underlying issue becomes that we do not see the necessity to allow the expression of the self to take on the form of what we could be the best at doing. We are rather fiercely beginning life with a necessity to enforce equality into everything. This let me say it like this. There is something wonderful that happens even more. I remember having heard something interesting very recently. We allow ourselves to never discuss with correctness which kind of direction we are willing to take in life until very late in our, not at that point, not even our development, but our later stages of maturation, mental maturation and physical both. So what we end up doing is we have not gained proper, so to speak, goal. We are all as lost as we were always before, just because we never thought about trying to unveil this question in in any way before reaching to these not proper stages of moderation, but just later ones, as if because it's later, it's going to be better. This necessity for ridiculizing or underestimating the capacity that anybody has to deal with their concept of self, let's say, it's you can explain it. I am talking about a fucking lot of things without mentioning any of them. I guess you can say that I'm talking about education and also the way in which we raise kids and the way in which we interact with other people in society and how we teach others, mostly obviously infants, to interact with human beings and whatnot. I'm trying to talk about this thing of, yeah, sadly, I think something that happens quite consistently is we forget the possibility that we have in our hands of just enjoying doing what we can and acting in ways in which we feel properly oriented towards any direction. Because not that we are completely incapable of doing it, but rather just due to how we allow ourselves to not have the need at all to understand what we are. It's this disconnection between what one is, this transposition onto the whole world as the main focus of the consciousness, so to speak. It's you could say it in different terms probably. Something funny that happens is the discourse of the social consciousness is the only one that exists within the mind of a children, because what they have to deal with is not what they think, but rather what they are told. The commonalities of the world think about. We do not get the possibility to think about ourselves or about anything that we might find interesting when we are in earlier stages of life. We have, as like I say, it's sort of, we have 1,000 different explanations for that. And however, if we get to develop how unnecessary it is for us to try and take any kind of direction, if we allow ourselves to ignore the possibilities that we have about moving into any kind of later explanation, if we get in our own way and we start to remove from what we are all the things that might be, we can come up with enough not just explanations but justifications for everything else, so that we do not have to deal with then the reality of and that perhaps what we in general as a wholeness might be talking about or are talking about might not be as interesting. So what should be a lot more useful would be for me to understand what I seem to be at least I guess just interested in. I will say I think it's sort of implied in what I mentioned before. Sadly, one of the unavoidable conclusions of trying to be without actually being given the possibility of being itself is we we lose a lot of the capacities that we have in regards to being ourselves. So what we end up with in our hands is not us, but rather this complicated mess of yeah, what we have been told is useful. There is I have already mentioned them before. Designing machines. This ideology of designing machines enters into play since we are so little. We're always being bombarded with them. When we are adults, we can realize that they exist and that they have any sort of influence in us since always. But even from our early stages, we are given things that tell us that we should care about them. So we know we only end up taking an affiliation with this thing that told us that it was important without really having decided for ourselves. We can, on a biological explanation, we have taken a decision before realizing that we have taken it. Then, once we have taken that decision, the conscious apparatus starts its whole play of justifying why things happen in the way in which they did through this, so to speak, excuse that is the consciousness and the will that we possess and whatnot. This degree of self assurance that we have in terms of wanting to believe that we want what we want, what we say we want. Okay, sorry. That desire to believe that we actually, in all honesty, what we express outwardly that we want is what makes it happen, not the true interest for what we have in front of us as the motivating for us. In the case of a completely, I don't know, I think there is something funny about saying an analyzed life. I remember hearing about that term quite a long time ago at this point. It was in one of the many books. One of the many books. I think it was like Socrates who said something along the lines of life without meditation. And basically something like that, no? An analyzed life is not worth living. Something along those lines. We always have the possibility of analyzing what we are, where we are moving, what we are doing, and all of that. It doesn't really happen. It's not something directly bad, I will say. Also, hello, dear Crespian. Good night. Welcome. And I will say, not exactly in that sense of unanalyzed. I don't think analysis is the proper word. Unrealized. We are given the possibility of realizing what we are ourselves. That very much accurate. definition of self-realization, that event, as a never, I think it's a proper expression, ever lying, because it's always waiting for us to take a chance and try to do it. Ever lying opportunity of finally realizing what we want, and after that getting to properly move towards what we say that we like. In other cases, it might not happen that we get to go towards those things, but in most, if not all the cases, we can always create excuses that allow us to evade the necessity to commit to any of those things. I wouldn't say it is something bad. It's just an issue in terms of it might be bad because everybody can create excuses for anything, but losing against the excuses themselves is the issue. Anybody probably creates excuses for everything. We lack enough willpower, quote unquote, to be capable of standing for ourselves in terms of the decision that we want to take against the own arguments that we create. It is that we end up then realizing maybe I should be interested in what I am doing. Maybe I should actually have any desire to do to gain the things that I say I am following. Maybe I should be trying to apply myself to doing stuff that I find as useful. All of those things should happen, but we do not allow it to be in many cases. And all of this, I haven't very much explaining just the process of deciding what we like. Okay, why? What's the goal? We get to understand what we like, what we can do. Then we allow ourselves to do that unavoidably. Uh, there are obviously many directions to take, but unavoidably I'm going to just dedicate myself to one of them. Not, I think if I had to try and explain it, there are maybe too many possible combinations that could be explained deeply as to, like, for example, we could say that we are doing what we like without truly having an interest. We could be doing what we like itself without committing to it because we fear just doing what we want. We could never do what we like knowingly. We could never realize what we like. And in this case, that's what I'm trying to talk out only. We do what we want, what we find interesting. I think very few people can properly see in themselves a development in terms of understanding how it needs to be shared. I would. It is an incredibly risky claim to make, but perhaps only those who reach the highest pinnacles of knowledge find out then that it is time for them to share. And even then, it doesn't truly mean that we have interest in being proficient teachers at anything. We can only realize the necessity for us to share the things that we have ourselves discovered in think about it in terms of, I think it's wuxia novels or such. It doesn't mean that because you have learned how to be immortal, you can now instantly teach anyone else how to be immortal. You have to make them go through the whole process. And sometimes, even if you believe that you can teach anybody, some people might not be capable of going through the hardships that you did in order to get to the same conclusion that you reached. The same issue happens in the field of the thoughts. Suddenly, we have many things around us that are quite hard to access because we are always lacking behind that proper experience that remains in what was experienced through the eyes of the creator of anything that is being discussed. In many cases, I will say anything that has to do with philosophical systems and psychological ideas and the concepts of being and whatnot to reach similar stages as those that the other authors, seem to be trying to talk about. We needed to be capable of imitating their conditions or their own experiences to be capable of finally reaching that then. And I don't know if it is exactly bad, but sadly, we do not have that. That's the biggest issue, I would say, in this case. How can we convince ourselves, or how can we be sure that what we are doing is something that we actually like, even more when it comes to imitating someone else? I would. There is always underlying issue. Maybe some explanations only come from the justification of the self, not much more. So maybe take it as more than anything else that in this case. But I always saw how deciding what I actually want to be is complicated, but it's better than directly copying someone else. Not because it is impossible, eh? Ciencia? We're talking of science and mortals, not wuxia, supernaturally intense martial arts. Yeah, I mean, the issue is they they use sort of interchangeably the same term. I know. I also knew that it could have been named Xiangxia, but yeah. I I never truly. I think both are also mixed in many what is it manguas. So it's hard to understand if it is Xiangxia or Wuxia. But yeah. The Xiangxia, this whole idea about how the realms of immortality and the degrees of enlightenment that one can reach that the Chinese culture mostly has. I guess there are also forms of that. Our level really is the frame of those stories. Yeah. I mean, in both of them, both involve uh, martial arts to some degree. So unavoidably, it's all, at least in its more popular contemporanean form, all about fights and such. Yeah. I remember. I also used to read a lot of them. I mean, it's very funny to do it. It's a very good way to entertain ourselves. but but yeah, that's also the point. It's also necessary to reduce it. I remember I used to sit probably go through like I think one day I went through like half a series of 500 episodes or so, or chapters, as in manga, chapters, manga, and it was incredibly crazy. So yeah, a more proper, less extenuous consumption of those media. But anyway, the point was to trace some similarity with this whole level of, oh wow, yeah, yeah. I get to develop myself. I mean, the whole Sensia realm has this this whole explanation about how in many ways you can see how enlightenment itself does not come from the direct revelation given by someone else, but rather the proper acknowledgement of the reality of the revelation that is the explanation experienced by the person itself. Only by understanding properly what is being talked about, it is that the soul gets to advance to a more divine realm, so to speak. The Chinese often spiral into the same few tropes. I don't know. I wish I have read more Chinese things in general. I I haven't even read like Journey to the West, for example. It directly the story. I have heard it 1,000 times. I have seen adaptations. I have seen many stuff, but something wonderful is in reality. I do not actually investigate any of such. Uh, excuse, I don't have enough time. Reality is, I just don't make time for it in my schedule, busy with what I like. But yeah, anyways, what I was trying to say was, oh well, sorry, I was, uh, how do you say that word in English? I don't remember. Huh? To look at Korean literature? I don't even know if the Koreans have any sort of mythology of their own. I am pretty sure they do, but I literally don't know anything about them. But yeah, I guess there are always lessons to learn from those people. I don't know. I think to give it a proper answer, I think the most influential stuff has been the Buddhist teachings and the Zen concepts and whatnot from that part of Asia. And thankfully enough, we even here we have had the possibility of looking at things that come from the Hindus and Hinduism and whatnot. So we're not as distant from that, but still, reading the myths itself is always complicated. They are very long, and I don't know. It's a long process, man. But anyway, we can keep just thinking about things ourselves. Not always. There is something to gain by looking back. I I don't know. It's weird to see how we like to treat that. In It's true that indeed by not understanding your past, your future becomes endangered, but it doesn't really mean that you should scour every single piece of information that came from ancient Mesopotamia just to understand how the bright future might look like. It's not like that. I guess it's more like in getting the grand scheme of the picture of what has been history previously, you have to understand what the grand scheme of the future will also be, and how it is possible to make it change. That's a more correct quote, I feel like. Anyway, uh, let me let me continue. I think, if I am not so wrong, probably I will be, because also now I lose myself in much of the stuff that I say. I think I was around this part of, and something funny that happens is we can do what we like. We can commit ourselves to doing what we like, ignoring all of the other avenues, as I said before. When we do what we like, we develop what we find interesting. At some stage, we might realize that we have the possibility of teaching that to others. The issue is we do not truly possess the tools to do that in many cases. Just, for example, one of the almost universal realizations that every single human might have is we need to keep procreating in order to sustain the species. It doesn't mean that just because we realize that we instantly become proficient parents or anything of that sort. Awareness, in that sense, doesn't mean capacity or proficiency. It's just we realize something. At best, you can say realization opens up the possibility for the dialogue and the interpellation, I would say, of our need. The new need becomes a niche which needs to be fulfilled for our set of skills, and which we can decide to develop ourselves in. And in that case, it makes it look a little bit better, I guess. It becomes a lot more of a responsibility of the individual to not be capable of inheriting what they learned through their own processes to others because you lack the capacity. But I am still quite unsure about all of that. I will say it's not such a solid theory, that one, because what I was also aiming for was not just that side of saying, yeah, you get to experience, understand, and absorb things by going through the same path as the one created what you are looking for, so to speak, as the one who was capable of obtaining those conclusions that you are looking for. But also, that there is this degree of an unspeakable reality. Let's say it like this: there are some sensual things that can always be expressed through words and then through everything else that is related to the physicality of ourselves. There is a degree of connections that does not happen in correlation with all of this. We, for example, let's say it like this: if I never feel like I will properly be capable of understanding what is being told to me, no matter how much I read the things that I read, it might as well never become a possibility for me to fit what I am trying to introduce into my brain. Saying it in a more understandable way, or in a more positive way, the moment in which I open up, even for a slight second, the possibility for a breakthrough. Not just the desire, but the possibility of I might be actually capable of understanding the things that I do, that I am trying to understand, basically. Only when I do that, I end up gaining then the proper benefits of what I am looking for. If that does not happen, I do not get to become proficient at anything. And that is not something that can be forced, I would say, or that is not something that the person who is teaching me can make sure happens. I will so far say, I guess, that's something more of a somebody should dedicate themselves to that, but also, yeah, certainly no dictating who has the right to have any interest on which things. So suddenly we don't get to force people to go in that way. I would say. I mean that's like unavoidable even more. The final issue of what I'm trying to talk about. Yeah, yeah. Everybody can take a direction of their own. What makes you believe that they won't take the direction of the satisfaction of the self and nothing else? Why would I choose to care about the rest of the world when I am not even being shown the rest of the existence? And when I am not being constantly reminded that there is out there something else besides just myself. So it's not so easy. It's not so simple, sadly. But anyways, I wanted just to explain that. I think I have tried mostly to process it. There is always something I said before. This sort of spirit that happens to live within oneself when we get to go through the same things as the others is what allows the most for those sort of moments of epiphany. But we don't really have a proper grasp at that. I guess I have a fucking lot of things. The only proper explanation that I can try to give it is perhaps something wonderful that we could try to take more advantage of is this pre-conscious level of consciousness itself. Not in the general explanation, but rather in there is something that I had always been fascinated with. Um, Benjamin Franklin, I think it was, or well, somebody very important from the past. I don't remember which one of them. In the end, most of them were incredibly crazy. Somebody, a guy, a very important person, did or used to do something very useful. They would grab bo- steels or balls of steel. They will hold them in their hands, and what they will do is they will make sure that if they were to let go of those balls, they will fall into pots, also fires that they make noise. Why? Because they need to trigger that level of fusion between the conscious and the unconscious mind that happens in the pre-conscious state before exactly falling asleep. Those tiny seconds of activity that happen when we are almost falling asleep. When we are, so to speak, not just feeling drowsy, but we're moving between phases that was used by this person to get to love more things. I will say probably that is the closest approximation that we have to how we can try to make sure that we can trigger the same things and we can go faster through the process of understanding stuff. But there is no real explanation about any of that. There is no real way of being sure that what we are trying to go for can in any manner be ensured. Sadly, I will say we are not living in a world in which it's so easy for anyone to have breakthroughs continuously throughout their development, even less throughout their mental development. So we are very green in that, I guess. At least that means that we could reach so much more farther down later on in history. So it might mean that we are, for example, imagine that every single second we ought to understand a new idea. It will be so much different than how sometimes it will take literal years to understand this stuff. Even more understand new things. Who knows? Maybe it's just the beginning of something in a sense where we're still very much in early stages of humanity in all of that development. But anyway, I wasn't here to talk about such distant futures. I was just there to bring up that idea. I think it's always interesting because it sort of forgets that in some cases the individual gets to understand things. And this is also what I wanted to say before. Proper understanding doesn't lead to repetition of things. Repetition is not proper knowledge. It is proper explanations of things, what showcases that we possess proper knowledge of anything. If we can translate what we have when immersing ourselves in imbuing our schemes of the world with it is then I would show. Not if we can only paraphrase or bring back into the realm of the living what somebody else said before. That's not actually the point. The point is to be capable of making something with that, something that has any uses for us beyond just repetition. That's that's sort of the desire of yeah proper comprehension does not involve memorization itself. So who knows? Uh, I guess that's the first topic. Also, something that I realized like very late, very late, as in like 5 minutes ago. I don't know how much we have been here. I forgot completely to go and say on the Discord. So if I Discord, I should try to use that place. I should make sure that I, as the literal owner, don't ignore its existence. So let me probably have like one or two more things to say. Or thing from this world, the land of the living. But yeah, one or two more things to say for today. Uh, it- I remember to click the send button so good. Anyways, I I said it before. I haven't learned, learning a lot. It has been very interesting to see that. I I didn't really expect that to some degree. I think in some cases we just lose the sight of our capacities, so we end up letting go of how we hold so much of our possibility. Not everything is to some degree responsibility, but a proper possibility is a lot more useful than a responsibility. It doesn't mean anything to me to be responsible for my own life if I am not capable of handling it. Let's say I am just being overwhelmed by a responsibility if I cannot solve it in any way. So, what's what's the proper goal here? I'm so sorry. What's the proper goal here is there is something interesting in learning. There is always something wonderful about consuming information. It's just disappointing to see that we cannot ever mention that in the correct form. We keep getting lost inside of what are what are forms of entertainment. I guess it's always that we cannot really see the point in what we do if it's at the moment has no significance for us. Only once we can open doors of understanding towards different directions of being, it is that we can allow ourselves to believe in more things than what we get to see at first glance, or than what we used to see before and what we used to pursue before. But whatever, it's just, I think it will be so much more wonderful if people were truly pursuing what they say that they want at the very least. It's it's just annoying to see, even more because at some point you realize we are, in general, not just myself, we are very much capable of a lot of things. Why are we not doing anything that could benefit us? Why are we moving towards nowhere in general, in so many cases? Why are we incapable of properly committing to things? It's it's just sad, I guess. It's being human beings so full of chances, yet seeing many of them leave, or so, not many, so many of them leave. There are so many things that we could do that we never chose to. That at that moment it becomes weird, I guess. But anyways, completely anyways. That's just another tiny mention. That's, as I said before, not really the point of why we are here today. Uh, I'm trying to search for things before going into what is supposedly the most important one today. I I have been trying to not follow so much of a proper list. I think that in the end, allowing myself to forget about this stuff becomes too much of an abstraction. I have a brain, you know. I can think for myself. I shouldn't be relying so much on a proper, previously thought list of things. It's quite sad to not realize that, yeah, we can deal with some seconds of silence and some moments of lucidity, so to speak, and I don't know, self awareness. But all of that is better than just the emptiness of an already digested and chewed out idea. I I think in some way I might be just acting completely in opposition to this guy, but there was something funny that I saw. Uh, I have almost finished a course with one of my professors, and something that irritated me for so long was how much this guy abstains from speaking about the stuff. I think it's incredibly disappointing that we, just because I allow my sensibilities to interfere so much with what I truly want to mention, I avoid at all bringing it up. At least, I guess, what I can say in a different sense. At least, even if that happens, I don't know. I like to talk about semiotics. I don't directly go exactly into the terms of those people because I know how fucking complex and how fucking intertwined their descriptions are and abstract ways of thinking that they have. So I try to do my best to not mention them directly, but give more properly fleshed ideas and less complicated explanations of the things that they also talk about. But even then, it doesn't truly mean that we cannot talk about all of that at all. It's sad to see it, and I don't know. I guess it's just sad to understand that stuff like this will always be bound to be sort of lost to the time because unavoidably we we have many things to try, so we cannot truly move towards any one direction, nothing else. There is always a need for multiple tiny micro changes the aim so that it doesn't feel as boring. I guess, I don't know, probably, and not through this source exactly, there are still possibilities to just rely on complete basic repetitions of things to get results that are satisfying with what we are looking for, but sadly here it doesn't work like that. So I wish you a good night. Yeah, have a good night, Crispin. Thank you for being here. No worries. I I don't know. I think it's not really that late, and also I still have some stuff that I want to mention. So I don't even know how long we will go for today, but I will try to go early enough to have also a good night. That's the point. Thanks for everything as always. I didn't drink any water. I haven't drunk any water so far in this stream. I think I have been doing a pretty good job staying hydrated today. It has been, even considering it throughout the whole day, it might have been even a very, very good show. Anyways, once again, we're not here for that, so whatever. The goal, what I was actually aiming for, something funny that I keep seeing is we, we always have an issue with talking about things. Something funny that happens is we believe we can talk about anything. Not that we can't in terms of possibility, but rather as a proper limitation. We shall not go into all the possible directions of being something. I don't know if it is the correct word, but something depressing is to see that what could have been a better final result gets. Okay. In terms of video games, what could have been a good run because we decided to focus on any one strength of the builds that we were creating was in reality just a wasted opportunity because we forgot to look in onto any one thing. Sadly, in this case, the unavoidable reality is, and you know what? We could be here for so long. We could try always to do our best for such a proper extended period of time that it might as well become a possibility for us to get the good results that we're trying to look for in any direction, and maybe could be experiencing more happiness in that way. I would assume, yeah, I will present it in two directions. Firstly, most realistic one, sadly, because everyone gets to do what they want without the need to have a common ground. We might just get more separated between authors, but also that's sort of underestimating the human interest in general. Just by knowing that we exist within this world, we can get interested on what another something, another being is trying. Just by the fact of realizing that they are, that we sort of open up the possibility of trying to move towards their not just life, but field of experiences themselves. That's what's interesting. That's the sort of counter argument to the counter argument that just because we can see that they are having a good time, we can try to place ourselves in their position to see at least if we ourselves could have as much of a good time as they do on things. No, I, I guess, yeah, it's I guess the most sort of complicated one to mention in any capacity because it's to some degree the itself most complicated topic to properly try to figure out without feeling like the work is incomplete, let's say, because uh, not exactly clickbait, but what is in the title, what has been in the title, and so far has remained completely unmentioned. This self determination thing. There is something funny that happens in life that is related to how we like ourselves to be until we get enabled to not be, and we can aspire to multiple negations of being throughout different justifications of existence, different explanations of what being constitutes. Suddenly, the capacity to persuade ourselves into believing that what we are getting told is a different way of being without ever even trying to realize more than anything, trying to merely realize if what we are going for is truly useful or not. Only through that it is that we get to partially, I guess, appreciate if the directions that we are taking are the proper ones or not. In many other cases, what we have is only an empty representation of an unavoidable reality of our existence or an unavoidable conclusion to our existence. In that way, we, at least so far, in the current times, we too many justifications for an act that should not be as common. Not because itself it doesn't come from a negative place and whatnot, not to glorify it in that way, but rather because it suddenly comes from all the existing possible alternatives that bring out a chance to just say, and I might be right, I might probably be to some degree correct about trying this thing, about trying to see if, in this case, the self determination that I get to experience is fulfilling enough. And even more, there is this sea of promises that we like to make about how non being is more bearable than being. We never get to experience non being. I I am not here truly for that debate about how some psychedelic experiences could make you to some degree feel like you're probably not being while also being, or being while not being. But what I can say at least is, sadly, we truly don't want to figure out if being is enjoyable. We will rather have many, many excuses to not being than to deal with being. In some cases, I will say, I don't know, I believe it's too negative. That's the best possible way to say it, but also, I believe we are unavoidably moving towards a reality, not, not a reality with possibility, but possible reality in which every single one of us will be constantly reminded about the positivities of something that we are completely not unaware, capable of discussing with any sort of evidence or claims of not, and this is not to attack anyone, but and not just biblical or sacred references, but rather proper physical references of things demonstrable by anyone or imitable by any single in any single laboratory, so to speak, in that scientific way of yeah, we all could share the same illusions, and we could all of us have those times in which we get to properly reap the fruits of being, processing what other beings also did. It's just, I think the issue itself, besides just that, is we never talk about getting to be. So it becomes, I would even say it, in opposition to what are desiring machines within reality that make us wish stuff with this unconscious creation of machines of hatred that we start to hate, or let's say it more along these lines rather, because we are moved by certain desire machines that we have around us. We cipher other things as deserving of hate because we get to experience the overabundance of such annoyance in what we like. So we need to tie that energy into something else. Let's say there is this whole principle, not just physical, but also psychoanalytical principle of energy isn't destroyed, but rather it is transformed. Perhaps that's the best explanation as to why it is so common to see people who are passionate about the stuff be also incredibly angry about other things. And I don't know. I I will say doing with anything. We have many chances of being. It's just the acceptance of that, and after it, trying to move into any of those things that makes life endurable. If not, I guess it's just accepting too much the whole other side of the speech of, yeah, yeah, this thing that we are completely unaware of seems more interesting, you know? And I don't know, I could go on to a complete specific rant about how we can convince ourselves through particular methods and whatnot, and more on how it becomes a sort of object of affection, even the not being a state, just because we cannot properly put ourselves in the place of being, not in a sense of force, forcefully make us fit, but rather allow us to be placed anywhere. That sort of place ourselves. But whatever, to some degree, that's the main issue is. Honesty is the solution, but being honest itself is also complicated. If I have to be so honest, to the person to which I had been lying the most, I don't truly know if I will get that far. Even more if the sudden changes that I bring onto reality, because I chose to be actually honest now, might be overwhelming. So in some cases, we would rather keep lying. That's what I'm trying to say. Not assuming that we have preferences is better than to deal with them and trying to fulfill those things. The fulfillment of what we could classify as basic wishes. Yeah, I guess. I guess I don't know. I I think for today that's it. I I don't have much more to say. Yeah, I am satisfied with this, so I will depart. Mostly also because I'm incredibly close to falling asleep. So if I'm committing any mistake and actually falling asleep, uh, we'll call it here. No, no need for us to deal with that. At least not so far. So yeah, I guess thanks for everything. Good night. Also, before I forget, because I didn't say anything about it, I will also try when I export this particular stream to mention it on the description. But this channel, I have found a way to make something come true. I have always wanted to read this stuff, not in terms of oh wow, I I wanted to do voiceover stuff. Nah, not really. I don't care about that. I have many things that I should read, and I think a proper way to enforce the act of reading would be to try and read it out loud. Having that sense of shared experience makes it more bearable. I guess to some degree, that social, what I was mentioning before, that social level of experiences makes it more digestible, everything in general. So, trying to go through the things that I have to read myself, it's the channel in which I will literally be reading out loud this stuff, make it better. Sadly, unavoidably, it will make it more annoying because There will be many things that I should have tried to mention in any way that I should have ensured were captured in any dimension that I will not be capable of doing because it's just reading. I will not be commenting or commentating on any of what I read there. But at least it's from a personal perspective. As if 99% of what happens here isn't related to personal satisfaction. From an even bigger personal perspective or personal satisfaction, it's continue with the readings that I have to do. So yeah, I I already had something in mind that I should try to read for that. I will see when I get to read it. When do I sit down and properly read? I wanted to do it today. It took me too much time to set it up, so that's why I bring this up and there is fucking nothing. Anyway, um, no, for real. Sorry, I said it before. And I, as always, I just say I have nothing else to add. Then I am struck with the sudden realization of, oh wow, wait. There are this handful of things that I should bring up. So yeah, no, for real. Nothing else to say. Good night. Thanks. Have a wonderful night, evening, day, morning, whatever. Make sure to live a life and be happy, I guess. That's the proper only conclusion that matters here. And a question, Raid? No, I want to sleep. So raiding takes too much time some days. Yeah. Anyway, good night.